at a time, it started in 97. And this was a time when it wasn't maybe fashionable, there are fashions in the Brahmin family, but silence wasn't fashionable in those days. And when we opened Casa Sangam, Daddy Janki came for the opening. I said to her, what do you think, what kind of service we can do, especially, what do you see? And she immediately said, do silence weeks. And this was a bit surprising for me because I couldn't imagine what one would do for a whole week in silence. I'd never done a thing like that before, but I got information from the retreat center from Becky in the Philippines, and they'd done silence, and we built on that. And from there on, we did silence weeks for many years. And so it deepened my whole understanding of what silence meant. And of course, silence is a little bit like swimming. It's a different dimension being in silence. It's a dimension where you privilege being with yourself. And whether people are around you or not, it doesn't really matter, as long as you stay concentrated on yourself. This means that in many ways, silence doesn't mean to isolate yourself physically. You don't have to be isolated physically. You just have to be able to go within, which is a good practice for soul consciousness, incidentally. And you can then continue your silence even if you're in a group, which was what we discovered, of course, at Casa Sangam, because we lived together, did things together, did karma yoga together, and enjoyed life together and ate together, but we didn't speak. And so this opened up a whole new dimension of being with people, being with others at times, but not conversing, not exchanging on a verbal level. And what we realized was that the communication, however, went on all the same, because we do communicate through vibrations, through body language. There are many forms of communication that are non-verbal, as they're called. And our program expected us to write little blessings for each other at the end of the week. And people were really worried, how am I going to be able to write these blessings if I've never talked to these people, Well, at the end of the week, apart from the fact that a lot of people didn't speak the same language even, and would have not been able to talk to each other anyway, we discovered that it was extremely easy to write the blessings because you got to know the people quite well just by observing them and perceiving their vibrations and seeing their way they were, their body language. So this sort of completely opened things up to have us realize what we were actually experiencing, And there's several points. I never expected Daddy to offer us or to ask us to do a whole week. I thought, a whole week, of getting people to come all the way to Casa Sangam and stay away from their center for a whole week is a long time. And so we started out like that. And silence actually basically is a space that you give yourself. And it's very, very personal. We offered silence weeks and we created the space and a lot of stuff that went in that space. But on the other hand, if you had 30 participants or 25 participants, you would get 25 or 30 different silence weeks because each one was concentrating on something quite different. And that individuality needed to be respected. We never spoke to each other, but we organized things like cherry picking and cooking jam and weeding the garden and doing various things that you might do if you're living together, but all without speaking, and which meant that you never felt isolated. People dislike silence because they feel that it's isolating them in some way, but that's not really what it's meant to be. And so you also, when you start a silence, any type period in silence, you need to have an aim and objective, literally. You have to decide beforehand what you're actually going to do with that space that you're being given. And each one of us can consider, at that point, what it is. And maybe, there are different things that maybe you want to work on. You need time to think about certain things and take certain decisions and about your spiritual progress, etc. And there's maybe certain sanskars you want to look at. But on the other hand, this will permit you to understand yourself very much more deeply. Because silence is the door to the great indoors. We say when you open the door, you're going into the outdoors. Well, this is a door that leads you into the indoors. And so you can ask yourself, if at the end of your silence, you were to meet Baba, what do you think Baba would like to see? What change would he like to see? Or what change would you like to show him? Always involve Baba in your silence, because otherwise it can be quite tough. Like we discovered with a whole week of silence, that after about 3 days, when you weren't communicating, you weren't talking with people, there was a lot of stuff coming up that needed to be looked at. And it can be actually quite difficult. It can be quite challenging, because there's a lot of stuff that we actually do need to look at, but that we sort of put out of the way. We keep it aside and say, well, I'll do that later because I've got so much to do. We've got so much activity that's going on. And, well, so much activity is good, but on the other hand, there is something in there that does need to be looked at. And silence will give you that opportunity. And it's good to actually know that beforehand, because if you know, then you can organize yourself better and concentrate quicker where you need to concentrate. But even if you think you need to work on one thing, after about 3 days, if something is in your heart, it will come up and it will ask to be answered. And so it is good then to take that into consideration. Of course, it can be challenging. It's nice to go and have a chat with someone and not have to worry about the deeper issues, if you see what I mean. So silence is not avoiding talking. Silence is like when you want to go deep in the sea. If you want to swim and go deep, you have to wear diving equipment. You need the bottles of air, and you need the proper equipment to be able to stay down. Because if you keep having to come to the surface to breathe, you never really go deep enough. You can't. So it's a little bit like that. You need to allow yourself to go deep down and look at what you have decided to look at. And I suggest that you, while you are doing your silence, if you've already done it, then you've already done it. But if you're going to do it, take notes of what's going on, because when you come out of your silence, you might think, what happened there? And it's good to realize, right, you can journal if you like. If you want to take notes like you would in a journal, that's very good, because it's nice to revisit that next week, maybe, So silence actually won't leave you in peace. And there are times when you need to balance. These are all my own experiences, that you need to balance something that you enjoy, and maybe going for a walk with Baba, with the work that you're doing on yourself, which means, probably your personal issues, your sanskars, your challenges with other people, and various other things that are going on in your life. So always involve Baba, and he is the go-to person, as we say in English. And there are many things you could do. You could take him for a walk and just chat to him, or you can make him your companion for silence, or you can use all the different relationships, deepen the relationships that you have with Baba, or choose one that you feel you need to deepen or you haven't tried yet. Look for something new, because you certainly don't want to get bored. In fact, in silence, there's a lot going on inside, because if you're doing the work properly, the realization should come very quickly. And you have knowledge and you have Baba with you. You know what I mean? Listen to the thoughts that come. It's interesting when you're sitting in silence and you listen to your own thoughts. And listen to the thoughts, and then listen to the answer that maybe your intellect produces. And are those thoughts very sort of reactionary? Do they create suffering? Are they memories that are deep down that have not yet been laid to rest, as one says, that you've not sort of cleaned out? Because all of these sort of things are things that will happen in silence. And you may not have had enough time to really look at them, you know, because with service and work and life, you know, you don't always have time to deeply look into these sorts of things. And all kinds of behaviors will come up, or fears. And of course, you know, while you're in silence, there aren't as many ego games going on, of course. You know, you've only got yourself really for company. And so this is a time to review your spiritual path. And this is why, while you're in silence, don't fill your silence with other things, because we noticed that people would come to Gubyo and they think, oh, you know, a week in silence is going to be good. I'm going to be able to read the book, you know, the book this thick that I've been putting aside that I want to read and want to get into. Well, that's not a good idea, because the whole idea of silence is to look to see what Gyan and your spiritual practices are doing to you. What has it done for you? And how are you experiencing it? And we asked people never to listen to music and not to read, and not even actually to read mulis. You'd get the muli of the day, and if I was reading the muli of the day, I didn't comment the muli, because each person was working in their own space with their own choice. And I didn't want to influence their thought processes in any way by making comments that might be useful to me, but not at all useful to them. And so I'd keep very silent and just Om Shanti and meditation after the muli. And what happens is we all have probably stacks of nice notebooks, you know, that are full of daddy's classes and full of wonderful points of Gyan that we've taken from the mulis or whatever. But have we really looked to see what Gyan has actually done inside us? And this is what you can actually do in the silence. If you're doing it for a week, it's even better. You will have deeper and deeper realizations if you do it for a long time. And it's very beneficial, actually. Things change actually quite deeply. I mean, I'd say that silence is probably one of the best things that we could do right now, because there's not been that opportunity to go to Madhuban. you see. And we've all lost out a little bit on that. And Madhuban gives us a chance to detach from our day-to-day routine and have deep spiritual experiences. And you can provoke those deep spiritual experiences yourself if you do silence. And you can organize yourself to do maybe one silent day a week. There are various processes that you can use, because it's always good to have a plan. You know, silence is not just an empty space. You want to make sure what you put in there so you can work on it really well, you know. So silence doesn't mean that you're cut off from other people. You can perfectly well do silence together with other people, and eating with other people, working with other people in silence is actually very, very pleasant. It's very respectful somehow. It's incredibly freeing, liberating. We would notice that you'd take your plate and sit down at a table, and when you'd finished your food, you could get up at any time. You didn't have to wait for the other person to have finished talking and for you to give a polite response to be able to get up. You were totally free. We suddenly realized how freeing it was, because each one was in their own space. They're in their own personal journey, and the sitting together and eating was actually very, what I would call, companionable. It was very friendly. It was very sweet, but it had no expectations. And very often when we sit with other people, we do have expectations. We want a conversation, or we don't want a conversation, which is even worse, you know. And so it's very, very liberating in that sense when you're with other people. And it gives you this feeling of freedom and individuality and respect, you know. And silence is something that you can repeat, because we used to have people come to Casa Sangam, and they do, you know, some people even came regularly, sort of like once a year or something like that. And we do from 2 to 3 retreats each season, each summer. And some people come back, and, you know, you might think of it, you know, don't they get bored, you know, doing this silence retreat? And I always gave the same papers, because we give a sort of an outline, which is kind of like a homework. And the way to lead yourself into silence is through soul consciousness and the experience of the soul, and leading yourself very, very clearly into a soul experience, because otherwise you can have a silence experience which is not soul conscious. And that you want to avoid, of course. You want to have an experience that is deeply spiritual and that starts from a soul conscious perspective. So the first day was always on the soul and feeling oneself a soul and doing activities as a soul and going for a walk as a soul. And then the next day might be observing the sanskars, you know, observing my mind, interacting with my intellect. In fact, a lot of deep reflection as to what the actual knowledge, how we're actually using it. Because this will, you see, very often when we do have problems, is because it's something that we have fundamentally learned in Gyan, but that we haven't really understood properly. You know, now Baba says that every day, you know, literally be soul conscious, be soul conscious. And every day he says, remember me, remember me. And of course, all of these things, we know about them, but to what an extent are we really good at being soul conscious and remembering Baba? And we might not be that good at it, you know, and this is why we will have at some point problems in our Brahmin life. And very often, if you come to the Silence Week with a problem to solve, you will see that the problem comes from maybe a lack of soul consciousness. And it's good to do these soul conscious exercises to get yourself into the silence so that you're looking at it from a soul conscious perspective, And it was this whole idea of not communicating verbally is actually quite important, because if you talk and someone else can't help but hear, they can't all sort of walk around like this, can they? You're invading their silence. And so that is actually quite karmic. And of course, you have to make sure that everybody understands that if you're together, you're responsible for other people's silence too, And as you're responsible, now, if you need to communicate, these are all in, suggestions that, like, you're doing it as a retreat. And so I take it that you're doing the silence together. If you need to communicate something that's important, write it. Because I'll tell you, you won't have long, chatty conversations if you're writing things down. You'll just write, where do they keep the sugar? That's very simple. And the person can point to you, and you can then communicate very simply by writing. And that will it will avoid you actually breaking the silence. It's quite important, actually. I mean, all of these they're yuktis, basically, that you might not have thought of if you'd not actually gone through the process, Now, there are many things that actually you can be doing in silence, many, many things that you can be doing in silence. But solitude has to be a choice. If you don't really want to do it, if you don't feel that it's going to be beneficial for you, you will probably try to find a way out by listening to some music or having a chat or something, which means that you're maybe not ready for it. I mean, you do need to want to. This is why it's so good to already, right from the start, decide what you're going to work on. And we all have something different to work on, something different to look at. And this is why each one's Silence Week is so incredibly unique, Now, we used to, I don't know where you are in doing this silence, but if you're doing the silence in a center, there's nothing to stop you doing karma yoga while you're in silence. It's very healthy. We did a silence week in Morringen one point a few years ago now. And we completely weeded the garden. I mean, we did a lot of karma yoga, actually, which, of course, the residents at Morringen were not expecting so much good activity. I mean, you can get people to clean cupboards in the kitchen and all of this kind of thing during BK silences. And it's actually quite healthy when you're doing something with your hands, like you're cleaning, the cupboards in the kitchen, and maybe you're taking out the knives and the forks and you're cleaning it all and you're washing it. And it gives you a sort of a stability which allows you then to concentrate very clearly on something that your mind is thinking about. And it sort of keeps you connected in some way with yourself. It's very healthy, actually doing activities. And then we used to, and this you can do wherever you are. You can go for a walk, for example. And when you're doing silence, you will find that you are very sensitive to nature. And we used to do nature walks where, of course, Gubbio gave us this offer, but if you can find different spaces in nature, we had lakes where you might have a river or whatever, and we'd sit by the lake and feel the different vibration coming from the water. And then we'd go into a wood and see the different vibration that there was with trees, or where there was a beautiful view, or where there were crops or plants growing, and you would feel the vibration. It's very nice to come close to nature when you are actually doing silence, because it makes you, silence can be very, can have strange effects on your mind. I mean, to be very honest, Genti at one point, after a couple of years, she says, but don't you have any problems with people going a bit crazy, with the silence? And I said, no, why, And because, of course, it's true that when they were doing silence, or they tried to do silence in Madhuban, and Madhuban is very noisy, it's a difficult place to do silence, they found that people were isolating to be able to do silence. This is why it's good to be in a group that is all doing silence, because that way you don't feel left out. You're all doing your own thing in the same atmosphere. And of course, we allowed people to interact and do natural, normal activities, very normal activities. And so they never felt isolated. And this is a very healthy position because it's a natural positioning. You know, if we're going to do introversion in our daily Brahmin practice, we will need space and time to do that. You know, and so it's not that, you know, you isolate, sit yourself on the sofa and don't do anything. You don't move because you're in silence. Silence can be very active. Yeah. It's got to become natural. It's got to become part of your life. And silence will empower you. And when you are empowering yourself, you've got to realize what can Baba empower? Baba won't empower just space. You have to offer him something that he can empower. So it's good to discover your specialities, or your qualities, your virtues, and offer those to Baba in your silence and say, okay, these are my qualities for service, give power to them. And of course he will. And you will find that your qualities have been empowered, and you will feel this. So that's one of the things you can do. I mean, there are many, many things you can do in silence. I'm just giving you a little idea. And then don't forget that the last thing I would like to say is that silence is a state of mind, and your inner being will express itself in silence. And so don't forget Sakash. Now Sakash was we had a whole day on Sakash, and giving light to the world. Now, it's a very unselfish experience, because you're not only looking at yourself and the people around you and your own center and your own country, but you're looking at Baba's work in the whole world, and you're watering the very, very arid, the very dry earth where the seedlings need to come up. You're doing a lot of very subtle work when you're giving Sakash to the world. And when you're in silence, your mind is more open to that kind of thing, because, you know, talking about, let's say, where did you put the scissors, you know, is something very limited. It's very now, present. It doesn't automatically make you think of something that's going on the other side of the world. And silence will open up your mind to that unlimited sort of feeling. And so Sakash is a wonderful way that you can send the power that you've accumulated and good vibrations to other places and do an enormous amount of service, because that's probably one of the main services that still needs to be done. As more and more things will be more and more difficult maybe to actually do physically, we'll have more and more time to be able to do it subtly. So there you are. I mean, you have questions, maybe. How do you want to do it, Anita?
Yes, thank you, Wendi. It was all very clear and very comprehensive, very practical as well. Thank you for that. Yes, we asked for that. Thank you. So it was really very, very good. So Wendi, the first question is like that. So what to do? Let's say I want to be in silence, but with me, around me, there is, let's say, one person who is constantly speaking, and making a lot of noise in this way. And I can't stop this person. So how can I manage this situation?
Well, that's a problem that we used to have at times, because people, of course, if you're talking about people who are not participating in a silence, You then are going to have to isolate yourself, which of course is not something that I was looking at. I was considering that you were together with people who did want to do silence. And I mean, if it's someone who's in the silence with you, then you can remind them, or just smile and get up, but be very kind about it. Silence can be very challenging for people. I had, funnily enough, during those years in Goubion, I had a brother come to me and say he was really afraid of the silence, that he was coming because he wanted to see whether he could challenge this fear of being in silence for a week, And I was really surprised because, well, when he started, of course, it turned out that he had no problem at all. But a lot of people feel challenged by it and have this feeling that they must chat. It's like feeling you're suffocating and wanting to come up for air, but as I'm saying, silence is going deep and making sure that you have your breathing equipment on you, so that you can breathe underwater and go down and down and down much deeper. And so certain people don't like silence, and certain people are very afraid of it. And silence is actually incredibly comfortable. Silence is very cozy. And a lot depends on how you create that space inside. It can be quite, attractive. You can be quite happy to stay on your own. I mean, if you are well trained in silence, if you're used to it, it's much more pleasant to be in silence with the people you don't particularly enjoy, and it's much more beneficial also. You can, if you're chatting to people, it's difficult to include Baba all the time. You can have much more of a communication with Baba and a private conversation when you're alone. But not everybody actually likes this kind of thing. It takes a bit getting used to. So if they're not Brahmins, then you're going to have to avoid that presence and know that you can only do silence if you're in your room or, avoiding that, But it's good to let them know what you're doing. Be sweet about it.
Okay, so the sister here is asking specifically about situation at work, and at work she can't isolate herself. So what would you recommend to her?
Well, of course, if people at work have to talk to her, she's going to have to answer. Work is work, But if, on the other hand, she's got to work where she doesn't have to intercommunicate with people and people are just talking around her, then it's up to her that she's going to have to be extra concentrated on her own thoughts and not be out there listening to what other people are saying, if you see what I mean. Because, of course, someone who's talking, will intrude on your silence because you can't stop hearing it. You will hear it. Your ears are open, But at work is work, and it's very difficult. I mean, sometimes you can create a form of silence, a space. If you're sitting in front of a computer, for example, and people are seeing you're doing something, or they think you're doing something, and maybe you've just put something up on the screen, but you look like you're looking at it, but you're actually not reading it. Now, that will give you a space where people will think you're in silence, or they'll think you're reading, and so they might respect that. But when you're working, you're going to have to realize that people might have to talk to you, and it's not very easy to organize silence when you're working and exchanging with other people. You'd have to work it out on a Sunday or on a day off, or in the evening when you're not working and you're not with other people.
So the question is, can you tell us a little more about asking Baba to empower my specialities for service?
Yeah. You know what your specialities are? That's another big question. Because in Kata Sangam, we used to play a game, not in the silence retreat, in the normal retreats. And we'd ask people to present themselves and possibly, you know, to try and develop a kind of a spiritual awareness. We'd ask them what one of their qualities was, what one of their virtues was. And they'd often say, oh, my name is Maria, let's say, but I don't see any particular virtue in me. Well, I mean, that is being blind. It means that you have not, you're afraid of looking at it, or you think that admitting that you've got a virtue is maybe arrogant. But Baba teaches us to be proud of the virtues that we really have, and that's not arrogance, you see. So if you're really wondering what your virtues are, you can say to yourself, okay, what is it that I really am good at? And what is it that I really like doing? What do I enjoy doing? Anything. And we had people, of course, this was perfectly Lokik people, and they would come and they'd say, oh, I enjoy cooking. I'm a good cook. And then we'd say, okay, you're a good cook. How many qualities do you have to be able to be a good cook? And if you want to be a good cook, you've got to be organized. You've got to be practical. You've got to be willing, because you have to do something that is going to be eaten by other people and will disappear. So it can't be something that you are going to recognize as your own. So it's unselfish, in other words. I mean, there are many, many, many qualities and virtues that come from just being a good cook. One child once said, you know, I'm very good at playing. Well, it takes a lot of lightness and creativity and spontaneity and all of that to be able to be good at playing. And of course, if someone says, well, I think I'm actually quite a good mother, well, then you've got 2 pages worth. There is so many qualities that we actually have and virtues that we have, but that we haven't really recognized. And maybe we haven't recognized because nobody's actually told us. It's funny that, but we're quite discreet at maybe telling other people how good they are, you know, and maybe we shouldn't be. Maybe we should be more open with what we see as virtues. But anyway, you can do it in this way. You can take it in this way, you know, by looking at what you like doing best, what you're good at doing best, and then you'll see the qualities it takes to do it. And then, of course, you ask, you know that those are really yours, you accept it, and then you know that you're going to be using them for other service. So there's no arrogance about it. And you know you can count on those virtues because you know they're there. And so Baba will empower them for service.
Thank you. Okay. So maybe the next question would be about the intellect. And indeed, during the week of silence, it's maybe a bit different. But when we have a normal daily routine, how shall we engage intellect? What shall we do with intellect during the day so that we are able to go into silence whenever there is time and space for it? How to work with intellect during the day?
Observe your intellect, because you will have thoughts coming. And when thoughts come, we don't normally think about the thoughts because it's so normal, you know. You don't think about them. Take time during your day to think about the thoughts and to think how the intellect responds to these thoughts. And you will be surprised at what you see. If you listen and observe what your thoughts are doing, and you'll have a thought or you'll see something, and a thought will come and your intellect will take that thought, and the intellect will, you will see many, many sanskars coming up that way. but you've got to observe it. And that is something that, you can do in your silence, even when you're preparing silence and you're not really actually yet in silence. Try and observe, because these are things that one should be able to continue even in our normal daily life. We should be able to do that, because the whole reason for silence is not that it's something that you can do once every 3 months or something like this, but it's something that you can actually slide into for short periods of time quite regularly. If you become used to the idea of sliding into silence, it's you know where to go. When we first start trying to do silence, we don't know where we're going. We just see that we're not talking, and now what? It's very simple. But if you develop habits, which you will, if you do silence regularly, you will develop habits. And one of the habits is to observe your intellect and what it is doing with the thoughts. And you would be surprised at what you discover. And the attitudes and the actually sometimes quite negative thoughts that you are automatically, that your intellect is producing. And these, of course, are good to observe and say to yourself, where did that come from? And why am I having this attitude towards certain things? Why? Where you probably would have thought it's just normal and would not have gone on thinking about. This is how we can transform, actually. And you can do this in the bus, when you're riding the bus to work or something. You don't have to talk to someone on the bus, but there are many, many people there. It doesn't matter.
Thank you. Okay, so maybe another question is, you mentioned, okay, what would you say, how practicing silence and tapasya lead us to our karmatit stage? So what is the connection between silence and our final karmatit, perfect, complete stage? Thank you.
Well, I think the connection is awareness, because you won't become karmatit if, as you go along, you always repeat the same errors. You will be repeating karma as you go along. You clean one karma and then you create another one. And the important thing is to avoid creating karma. Now, how do you do that? And the only way you will actually avoid creating karma is if you think. If you think about it. Where is it that I created karma? What is it that I should avoid? And like I was saying in the last question, what is my intellect doing? What is it saying when I see something? And like I see that the table in the kitchen has got a clean tablecloth on it. What does my intellect say? Does my intellect say, oh, that's nice. I was thinking of doing that yesterday. I was thinking of changing the tablecloth. It's good that someone's thought about it. Now, that would be a very benign, very simple answer. But let's say your intellect answers that question, oh, someone's changed the tablecloth. You might say, oh yeah, I know who changed that, because they always use that same old tablecloth that's got a hole in it. You see, your intellect will be slightly critical. Now, why is your intellect critical? Because if your intellect is critical towards a person, which in that case possibly it is, because you know that person always puts on their favorite tablecloth which has got a hole in it, and this annoys you, then you have to observe that. And to avoid creating further karma, either be totally detached from the fact that the tablecloth is their favorite one and why not, it's okay. or otherwise, you can resolve this in a more spiritual way. Be detached about it, accept and check your intellect to see if it's coming up with the same thoughts the next time the tablecloth gets changed. And I'm using the tablecloth as a stupid example, obviously, but we see the comments in our mind. And these comments can easily lead to responses that are not karmically accurate. So being aware, and silence will make you much more aware, which means that you will be much more likely to tread much more gently and create less waves and less karmic interaction with other people. And in that sense, I think that it has a lot to do with attaining your karmatit stage, because your karmatit stage means that you don't have any reaction of any kind. Everything is just absolutely acceptable. But of course, that's not going to happen unless you work at it. And sometimes we think maybe our realization of karma is fairly gross, but in fact, karma can be very overt, but it can be also very subtle. And you will be more aware of that subtle interaction and subtle karma if you do silence and observe your thoughts. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Wendi. Yesterday and today, Baba was speaking about dying alive. Could you share with us what you think it is, practically what it means for us, how we can die the living death, at this moment, practically, in this body still being here and now, okay?
Dying alive, when you think about what Baba says about dying, is you change everything. You don't have any of the old parents, the old relationships, the old family members, the old friends, the old habits. You don't have anything old, if you think about it. It's a new life with new people, new friends, new relationships. And of course, for Baba, the trick is to die to all the old relationships, although they're still there. You're still alive, and so they're there. And it means that you've got to create, the way I see it, a good stage of detachment, and realize that you can be, if you're someone living in a family, you can be just as efficient but in sustaining people and making them feel loved by your care than if you're attached or you're feeling emotional about things. You don't need to be emotional. You just have to be lovingly efficient. I don't know if that means the same thing to you as it does to me. Being lovingly efficient, you can go on and remain karmatit because there is nothing that's getting wound up in any way. You just remain very detached. And of course, it means that you can give as much as they need. If they don't need, that's fine, If they need more, you can give as much as you've got. And you don't feel like they're taking it from you. All the exchanges become, let's say, probably now, the best thing is to have the exchange through Baba. In other words, these are your children, or these are your souls. And I am doing what I can for them in their moment of need. And they're doing for me in my moment of need, but it's all for you, And that will help you make it easier. Because I'm not pretending that it's easy. You can't just die and then not die, When you're dead, you're dead. And you have no memory. The problem is, with us, is our memory, of course, and like Jagdish used to say, Jagdish was always saying, you need to forget the things you remember and remember the things you forget. Well, of course, yes, we forget to remember Baba, don't we? Well, those are the things we need to remember, you see. So it's a whole different life where there are different priorities.
Thank you. Thank you. So there is one more question, Wendi. It's like a personal question for you. The question is about your deepest personal experience in silence, if you can share it with us.
I have to think about it. Most of the experiences came slowly but surely as time went on. But I realized, I think probably the deepest experience that I had of being in silence was that silence, at least for me, gave me the experience of a very deep soul conscious stage, because I was aware that it was my mind that was thinking and my intellect that was giving ideas and judging. And I was quite detached from the body, actually. And this happened quite regularly. And I think it happened to other people too, because you get quite used to silence if it goes on for a long time. And so you become more and more and more soul conscious and less needing to talk or to exchange on a more physical level. It doesn't seem to be that important to do that. And you see the effect of that. You would see the effect of that kind of silence when you'd have Daddy Kumarka sitting there, or the daddies, you know, how they'd sit in silence. And they seemed quite happy to sit in silence. They didn't, you know, you were going to talk to them, you were going to ask questions, but and they would answer, but then they'd lapse back into silence, and you could feel that silence was comfortable. And it's the soul consciousness that it provokes that is comfortable, actually. I think that was my, you see, when you're silent, probably one of the most body conscious things we do is talk. If you come to think of it, we're making a noise, of course, and we're making a noise so that other people can understand. But let's say that we don't feel that it's necessary, and that my listening becomes much more subtle, that I don't need the words, I don't need a noise, that I can see and that I can hear and I can perceive. It's almost like a feeling. And I think it's difficult to describe, but that's, I think, the deepest experience that I had in silence.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing this personal experience, Wendi. Okay. I think you have answered most of these questions, Wendi. There is one more question. The question is about experiences of those people who participated in those silence retreats. So the question is, when you listened to their experiences, like from the beginning when they started and from the end when they finished being in silence, how different was their experience? What people shared, if you remember, how it changed for them. So what was changed for them?
There was quite a bit of tension because people were not used to silence. And especially, of course, when they came to Gubbio, very often they'd not done silence because, as I was saying, in 97, it wasn't popular. You know, people were not doing silence a lot. And it was 7 days. You know, it was 7 days silence. And it was real silence, because I didn't want to waste people's time. I thought, you know, you either are going to do it all the way and do real silence and give them every opportunity, and then they'll work it out as to how good it was and how useful it was. Now, people were very nervous to start with, but they would listen very carefully to the introduction because you gave an introduction and you told them not to read and not to listen to music and to listen to their own thoughts and, you know, try and see what Gyan had done to them. How Gyan was expressing itself in their lives, and what effect there had been. And at the end, what was surprising was they realized that they could understand and know people in silence probably more deeply than if they were talking to them. That was one thing they'd always say. And very often at the end of the silence, they were not particularly keen on talking. All of a sudden we said, okay, now you can talk, no problem. And nobody wanted to talk. After a whole week, they were quite happy in the silence. You see, what you don't know, you can be very afraid of. The thing is, you need to make silence your friend, you see. And then silence is an incredible preparation, because most people will go into periods of silence, let's say if they're ill, or, you know, they're in bed, or they're isolated for some reason, or, I mean, look at the lockdown, and look at COVID, the lockdown, and people have been driven to solitude that they weren't used to. And if you're used to it, it's a wonderful opportunity. It's absolutely wonderful, because you've made yourself your best friend. To what an extent have I really made myself my best friend? And people were, you know, they would go away without sort of really sharing at times. And then when they got home, they'd send you an email, you know, saying, or they'd send you a fax or something, because that was the days, you know, and they'd say, this is my experience, but they'd give it to you 2 days later. And they would have this incredible experience of going down to the station and getting into the train. And there they were, still with this silence in their mind, you know, and everybody else is behaving normally and talking and chatting and making noise and all this kind of thing. And they said it was quite difficult to acclimatize to again, actually. It's very attractive. Silence is very attractive. It's very beautiful. It's very gentle.
Thank you. Okay, Wendi. So I think we would like to thank you for this. And it would be wonderful if you could lead us into this sweet and powerful silence, this kind of experience. Yes? Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I withdraw slowly from the outside, from everything I hear and see. And I go inside, and there are only thoughts, feelings, and images in my memory. The present is out of focus as I concentrate on myself, on my journey. I know this journey towards my perfection means that each day is different. It is a journey of changes. I'm aware that this will bring a form of insecurity. I can't afford to stop. I have to keep moving, transforming, changing. And the images in my mind that I am creating are not coming from the outside. They change as I change, become more beautiful as I become pure. And the one constant presence that Baba offers me is what makes me feel secure, that I'm doing well. If I hold his hand, I can keep moving. If my hand slips out of his hand, I can't move forward because I don't really know where I'm going. The past is at the other end of the tunnel, and I can't go back. I have died alive. But dying alive permits me to hold Baba's hand very tightly because there is no one else. And that's good because I don't have to choose. And as I travel forwards in my mind, I become aware that things get simpler, more subtle, more peaceful, more joyful. And I wonder why I felt things were so complicated before. The future will not be a tumultuous meeting like a Kumbh Mela. It will be peaceful and silent. And I will have grown to appreciate that. To be silent and yet know. And know so much that you don't need to ask. And there is peace in knowing. And there is peace in knowing that there always will be that love. And details are not important. And I feel waves of gentle lightness and a deep, deep peace flowing over me. I am still on my journey, but my thoughts are indicating to me that the aim is not that far away. I can access that feeling through my thoughts. And then it will materialize in the Golden Age. Shanti.
Like moths plunging towards the flame, we journey to our home again. Like flowers open to catch the sun, our minds are open to see the one. To have you is the sweetest thing to feel. You are our everything. Oh Baba, dearest Baba, you came into this darkest night. You gave us back our inner sight. You found us broken and full of shame. You gave us back our crowns again. To have you is the sweetest thing to feel. You are our everything. Oh Baba, dearest Baba, you sowed in us the seeds of time. You showed us how the seasons rhyme. From high to low, from rich to poor, we find ourselves inside your door. To have you is the sweetest thing to feel. You are our everything. Oh Baba, dearest Baba,